Please like, subscribe, and comment, even if it's just with an emoji. It's a free way for you to support the channel, and for me, it might bring in some money from all the commercials they keep putting on my videos. Or if you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon or Ko-fi. I've got links in the description. Or you can hit the Money Heart Thanks button down below. Now, let's get back to it. Hey, this is the Sword and the Pen Reflections. I'm here with Dr. Perlmutter, and we're going to have a discussion about The Last of Us. Dr. Perlmutter, would it be all right if you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you? I think most of the people here know who I am.
Sure. My name is David Perlmutter, and I'm a professor of media at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. And I have been writing about media, appreciating media, depreciating media for about 30 years. I've written 10 books about the media and different things like war and police work. And I just love talking about everything to do with streaming, social media, gaming, movies. And thank you very much for being on. I want to point out, by the way, to the audience that I often draw my discussions from great talks I have with students. And I found you, Amber, and Pen and Sword and Pen, sorry, because I was trying to always find new content for my students of really great creators who are doing very thorough, analytical, just scholarly level insights into media content. And I was so impressed with you, and I've assigned you in class, and you are always among the most popular watches for our students. And the last conversation we had about The Last of Us, one of the students had said, "Oh boy, I hope Amber starts doing some analyses of that, because I can't wait to see Amber. She's just the wisest young person on the planet." So just, wow. I think you should put "wisest young person on the planet" as your introductory quote.
I was about to say, like,
nobody's asking this. Amber is required reading along with Shakespeare, Lord Macaulay, and Voltaire.
Wow, that's I didn't realize that. Now I'm like, I feel all embarrassed, but also kind of wicked. Like, yes, I'm homework. Well, hopefully I'm really entertaining and people just like that. That's what I like to put my own personal opinion in, because I think people respond well to when I add my own opinion. I can analyze the crap out of something and keep it academic, and then it does feel like homework, but I don't even like to listen to that kind of stuff. So I just let myself loose every once in a while. And The Last of Us, excuse me, was one of those that it called for some visceral reactions. And I had them, a lot of them. So it worked out for me. But you have also a claim to fame, where you were, well, go ahead and tell us, you know what I'm talking about. Go ahead and explain.
Yes, I've calculated that over the last 30 years, I've probably taught about 30,000 students, which of course is a rounding error on some successful YouTubers. And I've written 10 books, but I was on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart in 2008 because I'd written a book about this crazy thing called social media. It's called Blog Wars. It's out of print, so you don't have to worry about plugging a book. But he invited me to it, and you can take a look at it. I think it's behind a paywall now, but you can look at it through my website. And it was about this new thing called social media that was influencing politics. Can you believe that? Social media influencing politics with the election of Barack Obama, and also entertainment. And we were speculating about how social media would change everything. And of course it has. And here we are discussing it on social media.
I really needed to make sure that that little bit got out there, because I think that's impressive. And this was, you said it was in 2008?
Yes, before you were born. Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So you were predicting like Twitter and its prominence in steering politics, and of course Facebook was sort of a follow-up to MySpace, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's really remarkable to think, television didn't go commercial. It was a new technology in 1949. And of course, we remember a lot of 1950s television. We are still in the very early era. The internet became a commercial medium in 1989. There were versions of the internet for military and for educational purposes. But social media really didn't come into the fore until the early 2000s. And the 2008 election was sort of like the watershed moment, the big moment where everybody was paying attention and talking about it. And of course, Facebook at that time. Right now, my students are almost all on Instagram and TikTok, and Facebook is for grandparents. But I know I'm going to get a text from Mark Zuckerberg on that. But the different social media skew different ages and generations, and so do video games, right? And so do streaming, like Last of Us, for example.
Well, so you reached out to me and we were talking about long form critiques, like what I'm doing on YouTube, and you were telling me about your discussions with some of your students about media that's out there and their reaction, which to me is more organic than what we get online, because you get on the internet and you're going to see the angriest people and the most diehard fans, and the people who are in between are the people that we don't hear from. So you came to me during my Wheel of Time reviews, and then you had already watched The Last of Us and the first season. And then I asked if you could watch the second one, because we always have really good discussions about it. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what some of your students were saying about season 1 of The Last of Us. And then, of course, I believe you said that your daughter is a fan of the games and watched the shows. And so maybe you'll know some of her perspective on the second season. And then I'd love to get yours.
Yes, on the first part of what you're saying, I am very lucky to teach in an institution where a lot of people, I'd say 99.9% of people, are very reasonable. And I love to have discussions with students. Everybody's very polite and share their opinion, and nobody is shouted down in all caps. And yes, we've done research since the 1970s that show, unfortunately, when you have the 3-foot iron wall of anonymity or pseudonymity, sometimes that nice person sitting next to you may turn into an ogre online. So I don't know whether necessarily some people are impolite online, but we have really polite discussions, and students fall all across every opinion. And I learn a lot from them. I learn from the discussion. Of course, being a professor is like that story of Oscar Wilde, Picture of Dorian Gray, but it's reversed. I get older and fatter and balder, but everybody else stays 18. So I'm every year I have the perspective of 1,000 18-year-olds. So I learn from their viewing. And on The Last of Us, I'd say about 10% of the students had actually played the version 1, Last of Us, the game 1, and about 5% had played version 2. So there's always that discussion about. I personally don't think there's ever been, we'll talk about what my definitions are, a successful video game adaptation to another medium. I know people disagree with that. I don't think this one was. We'll talk about that. But I found very few students who thought that it was a perfect adaptation. Some of them said it was a good story in its own right, mm-hmm. That it separately was successful. So that was the main genesis of the discussion. Of course, we're going to talk about the details over the next couple hours.
Okay, there's a good comment on here. It says Irene Polka Dots is looking at Dr. Perlmutter's Texas Tech biography. It says he has written books on new media technologies. Curious about his take on experimental storytelling through video games. I am too.
Yes, and this is something that I think is going to come up right away in our discussion of Last of Us. So if you've played games like Last of Us or Skyrim or just any of those games where you're a character, there is an interesting limitation that you can only have so many constant companions. And I say companions in the sense of, these things go back in history. And one of the things we talk about is like everything new is old, right? So Alexander the Great, when he marched on trying to conquer the world, had a group of, he hoped, very loyal followers, and they were called the companions. And that's been adapted to video games, that you're the chief mage or knight or whatever going on the quest, and you can have one constant companion who is there with you all the time, unless you're in a massive multiplayer situation. But if you're just playing alone in your Xbox, you can only have one constant companion. Everybody else is an NPC that you meet along the way. You find out where some treasure is or some bandits, or you kill them. So I found it very interesting watching The Last of Us, and I was thinking, that's interesting. And the students picked up on that right away, is that, oh, they're following the software of, in the first season, apparently Joel or Ellie was only allowed to have one constant companion. Everybody else was met and then killed off. And then they moved on to another person who was met and then killed off.
I called them phases. So my review, it's almost done being edited, and then I'll throw it up online. I'm basically trying to decide how much footage from the video game I should actually put on it. But yeah, you're exactly right. And these phases lasted anywhere from a half an hour to 45 minutes in the game, where you would be introduced to a new character or set of characters, like what was it, Henry and, oh my gosh, I forgot the name of the other kid.
Frank and Bill.
Frank, that's in the show, Frank and Bill, but in the game, well, yeah, I mean, they weren't really together with Joel and Ellie. They were their own thing, and then they were dead by the time Joel and Ellie came on screen. But in the game, you're with Bill. Sam, thank you, Garsh. So then there was also Henry and Sam in the show. This is the kid who's deaf, or I don't know if he's deaf or he's just mute, but they speak in sign language. And you kind of get these vignettes in the show. They had that in the game, where you're just Joel and Ellie and you come across other characters or other scenarios, and also moments of character growth. It was all paired with a certain stage of character growth for Joel. And usually Ellie was the one who was pushing him along on that growth. So when you say that you can only have like one constant companion, but then in this game, they had other characters coming and going, it was still kind of what you're talking about, where they come in, they're there for a little bit, and then they go. But it would be interesting to see a game that comes out where there's a band. I mean, how different or how difficult would it be to have a band of people working together in a game that's set up like The Last of Us, where there's several people, like maybe 5 of them, working together? I keep thinking of like the hero's journey, where there's
somebody here in the chat is pointing out there are other games, and I'm old enough to remember in the early days of online gaming, which is still today. There are some games and somebody's pointed out Baldur's Gate 3 here being an example. Thank you, Spaced Oyster. Is that you can multiple people join at the same time, get online and be the Fellowship of the Ring together. I'm just talking about that in games where there's
single player, but you have characters that follow you, like Ellie, right? Yeah. So you would be the one person playing the game, but then there would be maybe 3 or 4 others who follow. Yeah, I haven't heard of any like that. I'm out of the video game loop.
Yeah, the question for me is, and somebody was asking about storytelling conventions, right? So gaming opened up a whole new set of storytelling possibilities, and that's always interesting to me, because I refer my students to a lot of research on what's called the morphology of the folktale, which is basically what are the tropes that are very familiar, right? So if you watch Star Wars through the lens of like 6,000 years of human writing about quest narratives, you see a lot in Star Wars that maybe an ancient Babylonian would go, oh yeah, I get it. Yeah, this is a guy going on a quest, and there's an old man who's giving them wisdom, and there's an evil lord who's using magic against them. So a lot of things that we see as familiar in our era were familiar thousands of years ago. The question is whether new technology allows you to play with that. I mean, obviously a video game allowed people from the very beginning to be Luke Skywalker, to be the person going on the quest themselves. How you then adapt that to the genre of the television series or the movie, that's interesting, right? Because you can't let people have choices anymore.
Yeah. Well, something that I think a lot of people brought up when I was doing my Last of Us reviews, and I thought it was interesting, was I would bring up comments like Joel did nothing wrong. in the first season. And it seemed like they were they were trying very, very hard to insinuate that he was completely in the wrong for what he did. And I'm going, I didn't see him do anything wrong. And then people would tell me in the comments, well, if you played the game, you would have known that he killed a lot of innocent people. And I'm like, okay, that's something that I think is an interesting tool that you can use to manipulate your audience's emotions. And this is something that I go over with my clients when I'm editing their manuscripts.
Oh, here we go. Hashtag Joel did nothing
wrong. Yes. I go over this.
I want to say, by the way, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but there are huge communities on Reddit of Sauron did nothing wrong, and the Empire did nothing wrong. In fact, a very good friend of mine here in Lubbock is a stormtrooper. He's in the famous Stormtrooper Legion. I'm forgetting which number, but one of the very first.
Did he get to be in the Mandalorian? Because I know that the Mandalorian.
No, but he was one of the first group that like donned stormtrooper armor. But he's in the. I'm not sure he wants me to tell anybody, but he's in the. The Empire did nothing wrong. So it's always interesting, no matter how evil an empire, which we know from history, right? No matter how evil you are, there's always going to be people who say, they were just misunderstood. So gaming and movies replicate real life. I personally support the Assyrian Empire and think it should be brought back myself.
So, okay, what I was going to ask was, or talk about was the tool of manipulating your audience's emotions, which kind of plays into what you're talking about, especially if you're playing a video game and you get to play the part of a stormtrooper. Maybe you find yourself rooting for the Empire. You do want to manipulate your audience's or your readers' emotions, and you can do that very subtly with word choice, by taking their thoughts through the character's thoughts on a specific journey of logic, and hopefully, and if you do it very cleverly, you can prevent them from thinking outside of that train of thought. And like, oh wait, if I just think about it this other way, maybe I'm doing the wrong thing or whatever. You are manipulating their train of thought, and you do that with storytelling in many different ways. And with video games, what I was seeing in my comments and suspecting, and then when I watched game one, I was like, oh, this is what they're talking about. When you are playing as Joel, I did not, but I watched somebody else play. I'm pretty good at putting myself in other people's shoes. I could totally understand the frustration and then the kind of violence that would be that this game would evoke in you, because you have to kill this guy or he's going to kill you, and then you have to go back and start over. So you start to become a vicious person psychologically with your character. And then you get to the end and you've had this redemption where you've saved Ellie, but then maybe later on you go, well, he did do a lot of really horrible things, sneaking up behind guys who weren't attacking him and killing them. It opens up a lot of potential for how you can manipulate your audience. But outside of just killing people, I'm trying to figure out what are some other ways that other story types of stories that you could do in order to create that manipulation. Like, okay, so building up aggression and violence, that's one thing. And then maybe problem solving, or I don't know. I feel like it'd be almost like you have a gigapet. Do you remember what gigapets were? It looked like a pager, and it would have a little character on there, and you'd have to feed them and like exercise them and play with them and stuff. It was so stupid. I totally had one. I had the knockoff. I forget what mine was called. Tamagotchi pet. That was what it was. I had a gigapet. That was the knockoff. Caring for something, because I've played games where you're a farmer and you have to feed the pigs and then you can like harvest them for bacon and stuff. I feel like that can become kind of boring, but if there's a way to make it really engaging, and with high quality graphics like what you have in The Last of Us, I wonder if there's like a market for that. And then it really opens up the possibilities of how you can manipulate your audience in a way that I think reading a book, you really can't, because you're just sitting there. You're not actually, as an active member, engaged in the novel or the show, I suppose. But I don't know. It's interesting to think about for sure.
Yeah, the comment about Joel did nothing wrong, if I could talk about that for just a moment. I watched the first 7 seasons of The Walking Dead, and I thought that was a very good show until it killed off, a character that I really liked, and then I DNF'd. I never forgave the show for that. But there was a character there who is probably in the post-apocalyptic community, which I'm a member of, one of the top 10 characters, I think, in the history of apocalypse is Carol from The Walking Dead, who starts out as a very stereotypical sort of meek, it's no other way to put it except a battered wife. And she's been beaten down psychologically and physically by her husband. And then her amazing arc is she becomes a stone cold killer doing anything to protect her family group. I mean, I'm not going to give away a lot of stuff, but like the group turns into her family, and she will kill anyone and do anything whatsoever to protect the group. And post-apocalypse, that sort of makes logical sense. So if we're going to say that Joel identifies Ellie as a member of her family group, of his family group, then him doing anything and everything to protect them makes sense in the post-apocalyptic ethics. I mean, I think the game plays with that from, again, I didn't play it, but my students told me about it. But the movie definitely plays with ethics change radically the moment the bomb drops or the cordyceps or the virus hits, right? And I'll just use one example from the first season, which I personally think is one of the best standalone scenes in the history of post-apocalyptic games, movies, streaming. There's a moment there where they go to another country, and where one of the original breakouts, one of the completely illogical things about this is how the physics of the logic of how this the fungus breaks out simultaneously everywhere.
All over. Yeah.
I don't want to get into that right this moment, but there's this wonderful vignette of this scientist who's an expert in fungal infections, apparently. And she is very quietly, she has the military in this country come to her and say, look, we've had this happen. And she looks at a victim and she very quietly says, in answer to what should we do, the military is asking her. Remember, in a lot of shows, it's the scientist who is like the person who wants to peace, love, and understanding. It's those evil military people who want to drop the bomb and like go to violence right away. But here, this very quiet woman scientist says, yeah, I think we need to drop the bomb. And I think the line the military says, like, where should we drop the bomb? Everywhere. Like, we should drop a nuclear bomb on our city. I'd like to go home now and spend my last minutes with my family.
I remember that scene.
Yeah, so that's 0 to dropping a nuclear bomb within an hour or two.
Yeah.
And I thought, gosh, that captures very well the psychology of what people will have to adapt to in those kinds of situations there.
That was a scene that was not in the game. Oh, I do want to say thank you to Valerie Caro before I answer that. $5, and I know that you dropped a $2 super chat before that. Thank you. How does the death of the author affect the storytelling in the show, since Neil Druckmann tripled down on his story for Last of Us Part 2? Well, Neil Druckmann, I think, changed his story before we even got a show. He, from what I understand, created a project in season 1 with other people. And then when he got his second game, he was the one who was in charge and got to decide what makes it in, what makes, whatever. He didn't take into consideration what the audience fell in love with. I think I've talked about this before in my my video about adaptations, where I talk about faithful adaptations. You don't want to consult a writer who no longer has an interest in being faithful to their own work. That continuing a story and retconning your original is just, it's always going to be a bad idea. It's never going to be a good idea. And I haven't gotten to The Last of Us game Part 2, but I've heard it from everybody saying, well, he has decided to set certain things in stone from game 1 that weren't set in stone in game 1. Like, when you leave things open to interpretation, and then later on you decide actually they're not open to interpretation, it completely undermines what the point of the open discussion was in the first game. So it was a bad idea to do that. He shouldn't have done this. My recommendation would have been, you need to tell a different story with different characters, or, you know, this story, but move it to different characters. Go to a different part of the world. Maybe it's a similar situation and we start out in this very similar situation. They're similar to what Ellie and Joel went through, but tell your story there with the rules that you want in place. Don't destroy everything that you've already created, or throw in a theme that no longer supports the original theme. And that was a bad idea as well, to flip his idea for what the theme was going to be for season 2. I think it was a great idea, but I think it was not the right story to tell that idea, to use for getting that idea across in season 2. I may have lost track about what we were talking about before that, Dr. Perlmutter.
Valerie asked a question about the death of the author.
Oh, I think that ties into that, though. The death of the author is assuming that once the work has been put out there, that it belongs to everybody else. So the idea is this: he put out a product, a story that everybody got to see, everybody got to love, everybody got to enjoy, and then he came out with a follow-up that said the previous one had no value, and or did not have the value that you all thought that it did. And he could only accomplish that by retconning, by retroactively changing what he says happened, what happened in the original. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing as death of the author. He tried to resurrect the author, and that's not going to work when the work has already been published. When you've already put it out there, it's over. Yeah, I don't know why people think that they can do that and get away with it. I've never once seen it work. I mean, could you imagine if, and I keep bringing it up because it's the perfect example. Imagine if Top Gun Maverick came out and they did with, I forget the name of Tom Cruise's character, but if they did with him what they did with Luke Skywalker in the sequel trilogy, not the prequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy, obviously he wasn't in the prequel trilogy. And they decided, oh, he's this jaded, like, doesn't want to be part of the world. You know, he doesn't believe in anything anymore. That would have destroyed the whole movie. But instead, he was the same guy. We had very similar themes. And nothing that we loved about his character in Top Gun was undermined or changed. We were not told, oh, he really wasn't that impressive of a pilot. We were told, no, he really is impressive, even by today's standards. So it's just always a bad idea to try to say that what you loved about the original or whatever happened in the original had no value. If people loved it, you got to respect that if you want success come the second time around with a new story.
What I talk to my students about is I feel that Hollywood believes in necromancy as its guiding principle. That some stories should be just left alone and you move on to a different story. I think we are in agreement in this. Mm-hmm. We've disagreed on some stuff in the past, but this we are. And why Hollywood feels that it has to dig up a story, reanimate it, change everything. Every villain was misunderstood. I mean, I guess you could come out with a Lord. There is a famous internet novel. I don't think it can't be published because of copyright, that retells the Lord of the Rings from the point of view of Sauron did nothing wrong, and Sauron was just a reformer, and these little elves were trying to keep everybody in the darkness. I mean, so those things do exist, but Hollywood's predilection to say everyone, Cruella de Vil, just everybody was misunderstood, and they were the real hero, and the hero was the real villain. That is a form of necromancy to me. Going back to the death of the author, some authors refuse to die.
Han shot first. I have to agree with that really quick. Yes, yeah. Han shot first.
I gotta say, I'm always intrigued by this because, of course, there's a lot of art going back to the first art, like the cave paintings, right? We don't know who the authors were. I mean, everything is speculation, right? So we only have the art. But then as we've been moving forward several thousand years, we've heard more and more. And now I think we are at peak authors trying to shape interpretation of their own work. And I always find that to be uncomfortable because I'm old-fashioned, and I think art should stand for itself. If you have to keep going back and explaining, nobody should ever do a Q&A to explain their art. Now I know that this is the era of social media, so of course, and there's some people out there. Brandon Sanderson is a master of this, and actually that's great, and I'm sure fans appreciate him. But I feel uncomfortable when authors, and I guess this is the case with The Last of Us, have to keep commenting on how someone's misinterpreting him, or you shouldn't take it that way, or there's something wrong with you. When you start attacking the fans, you're undermining art. That's my opinion. Again, I allow students can talk about it from any, but they feel the same way. I had a number of students say that they felt personally hurt that their interpretation, that the showrunner there was, at both showrunners were attacking their interpretation as like, nobody's allowed to think this way about my work.
Well, I think that if you write a story and it is meant to have a certain interpretation and people are getting it wrong, a large portion of your audience is getting it wrong, means that you did not execute your storytelling in the way that you should have. You failed to do what you were trying to do. And that's on the writer. That's also on whoever was editing it. That's on the publisher, not making sure that the story, what came out as intended. But this being a group project, and Naughty Dog was going to put that, like, we have our name on this, and then HBO, we have our name on this. At a certain point, it doesn't, if he sells the rights to Naughty Dog or sells the rights to HBO, it's their story now, and they get to highlight whatever the hell they want with it. That's kind of just how it goes. But if you've written a story and it doesn't turn out the way that you wanted, it's just kind of a crybaby-ish sort of thing in the end to go, well, it's not what I want. You can say in the making, I had a totally different idea for this story, and then it came out like this. That's fine to reiterate that story to everybody, but it to me, it just feels like if it didn't turn out the way you wanted, why didn't you just not sell it? Like, don't let them have it if they're going to change it so much. Or if you had a story that was so great before, why don't you go and write that story? When you let it out to the public and people are interpreting it one way and they love it, and then you tell them they're wrong, that's never going to go over well. To me, it's common sense. Like, I don't know, but there's a lot of like sheltered people who get into story writing. Like, I am one of them. I hardly ever leave my room because I'm always in here doing some form of reading or editing. And I think that it's a disappointment when people don't see what you wanted them to see, but you got to restrain yourself a little bit if you want to have that peaceful relationship with fans. Although there are some people out there who like to irritate people, who that's what they get a rise out of. And I'm talking on all levels. I think it's a bit sociopathic, but to find some enjoyment in causing turmoil in other people. And I do think there was a little bit of that in The Last of Us season 2. I think there was a bit of that intention. I don't know how you could do it the way that they did and it not be intentional to some degree, because it was so consistent throughout. Let me quickly read this real fast. Potato Whiz.
Yeah, this comment by Potato Whiz, like he was punishing the fans. Something I think of from a previous HBO series. HBO, I think we should give some historical context, especially to our younger viewers. HBO really established the idea that you could have incredible high quality, super high production art on television. I mean, there's always been great television shows. The Twilight Zone in the 1960s was a great television show. But if you look at a lot of, I just did a wonderful, I liked it, podcast with Park Narks on the episode 2 of called 2 of the original Twilight Zone with Elizabeth Montgomery and Charles Bronson. And it was a beautiful episode. It was a post-apocalyptic episode, by the way, and you can see the influence of that episode on The Last of Us. So anybody who hasn't seen the episode 2, which I think is the first show of season 3 of the Twilight Zone 1960s, go look at it and you will see an early version of The Last of Us. But the point was, it's pretty cheap. Their budgets were pretty low. HBO, especially with The Sopranos, and then just a whole parade of shows, including what I think is some of the best television ever made. Craig Mazin, who's one of the co-showrunners of this,
Chernobyl.
The Last of Us, Chernobyl,
Yes.
which was just astonishing. Now, Mr. Mazin, I heard his podcast about Chernobyl. I looked up a lot of interviews about him. Never once, he's quoted here as saying about being, he's defending Last of Us. And I completely understand. Art is your baby. It's your child. And I can understand it defending your child. But he never had to defend Chernobyl. I mean, sometimes some of the choices, like, he made a very good defense, like why is everybody speaking British? Because we wanted to have a consistent accent, and we just couldn't have people all speaking with a heavy Russian accent. Hey, that was a great defense. It wasn't even a defense; it was an explanation, and it worked. It worked beautifully, right? So if you're going to give a technical explanation behind your choices, that's fine. If you're saying, hey, idiot, you didn't get my genius brilliance, and I don't think he went that far, but if you're upset that people aren't recognizing your genius, maybe you are a genius, but you didn't express it well in that one instance.
Maybe you are a genius, you're just not good at showing it. Well, so did he write? No, I thought Chernobyl was based off of a series of journals or something like that. It wasn't his original story, but he adapted it. And I feel like I'm seeing a lot of great adaptations. The two guys who adapted the Game of Thrones, the early seasons, they did a fantastic job. They had just enough Hollywood sensationalism. I would say they put a lot more banging and nudity in there than
source
there was
material, right? They had just enough source material and just enough creativity.
They did a good job when they had somebody who was writing the story and the characters and laying down the foundations of excellent dialogue in certain scenes. It was all there, and they were able to take that and put it on screen. Is that maybe what Craig I forgot what's Mazin? I don't know how to say his name. Is that perhaps what we have in his case, that he's able to adapt good material, and maybe he was handed something in The Last of Us that he didn't know what to do with, like he was given more creative liberty over it?
Well, that's a good, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I mean, he did adapt Chernobyl. Technically there was a book, Voices of Chernobyl. So, I mean, there was a true story, but let's face it, we've seen a lot of terrible movies based on a true story. So I think his adaptation was genius. Let's go back to the television show for just 1 minute. Remember when we were talking about The Gorge in a previous episode, and I said The Gorge, and I will say The Last of Us, I'm giving a grade here as a professor. A+ for audio design, A+ for cinematography, A+ for special effects, A+ for props, A+ for a lot of things. I'm giving you a D I'm giving a D for story. I'm a D for casting. I'm C+, because I think there was some good casting. And then I'm also going to give a D. And I guess this is part of story.
I like the casting in The Gorge, just going to say, but in The Last of Us?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Okay. There were some side characters there, but in Last of Us, I think there was one bad decision in casting. And remember, casting doesn't mean that somebody is bad. It just somebody that may not be working in a role, or they may not be able to carry a bigger role than what they've done previously. I'm just going to say, I thought Bella Ramsey was one of the most memorable, powerful characters in Game of Thrones. Her scene about her pledging to the King of the North and then fighting in the Battle of the Whites.
Battle of Winterfell.
Winterfell. Oh my gosh, that was astonishing. And she was a young actress, and all of this stuff being put on her. Fantastic. And she carried that off perfectly. Whether she's the right person to be the lead character in every single scene of something else, I think not. That's my take. But again, that's a question of whether somebody is going to accept somebody as a character.
I think that obviously there's people who are upset that she doesn't look like Ellie from the game. But I think
that doesn't bother 90%, I mean, 67% of the audience, right? Because I mean, I don't have to have somebody who looks alike from the game. I have somebody who works in the character.
Exactly. And that was the point that I wanted to make about this, is that I think the bigger problem, however, is that she isn't the character in the game, in the show. When we're in the show, she does not behave like the character, even in season 1, because I've watched now all of game 1 and reviewed it. And like I said, the video is just not out yet. That character in the show is not the same character that we have in the game. My gosh, she's so likable in the game. Like, she's actually somebody that you start to love as a player. Like, she's fun, she's funny, she's helpful, she's supportive and compassionate. She still has her little spitfire, comebacks when she's talking to Bill. But at that point, by the time you get to that moment in the storytelling, she has earned the right to stand up for herself and speak up for herself and throw back a little bit when people aren't being the nicest to her. And they did not do that at all in the show. And so when I look at the show, like, the writing was different. It's not the character, the or the actress. It's the writing itself is so different. I have a very difficult time saying that Bella Ramsey couldn't do the role of Ellie, because we did not see Ellie. That was not written. The show was not the character in the games. And whether you can have a change in a character that is still likable or still enjoyable, but they just made her so detestable. Even in game 1 or in season 1, I had problems with her. And I thought that they were going to fix them by the end. Like, oh, they're going to make her into this character, but they didn't, as we saw in season 2. But the thing is I don't think that we can make an accurate critique of her performance, because we don't know how she would have played a likable character. We liked her in Game of Thrones. She was charismatic and she was strong-headed, but we only got a little bit of her. If we put her in this bigger role, can she handle being a character who is likable, who does have all of the qualities of the game Ellie that we liked? I don't think we'll know, because we don't know. I mean, there's no way she was up there ad-libbing. I don't think so. So unless she was, and that's why it turned out this way, then we can blame.
That's a very interesting.
You can blame the director, though, too.
You're making a really great point. But I want you to talk about the ad-libbing part. So the previous famous HBO show, which I 90% loved, was Succession. And it is a fabulously popular show with my students.
And a fantastic intro song. My gosh.
And interestingly, on that show, and this is where sometimes there's disagreement between people of my age and younger people, is that when I talk to my students about this, I said nobody is a good guy on that show. Everybody is despicable. It just levels of despicable. And I find, especially with younger viewers, there is a Team Shiv or Team Kendall or something like that. But going to your point about dialogue, one of the things the showrunners did on Succession, which I think was brilliant, was that they wanted to have these fabulously wealthy, powerful people who at the end of the day were inarticulate. They were trying to sound smart. I mean, everybody on the show is so concerned with sounding cool and sounding smart, and they would let the actors talk, right?
Yeah.
And then they would have these scenes where people are stumbling and mumbling and exactly, they're saying and it's perfect for capturing these characters. You are correct, absolutely. In terms of video games, right? The NPCs only have certain choices in how they respond to you. Hey, did you see Bigfoot with a witch going by here? A, B, C, D, right? There's only a certain number of dialogue. I guess now with AI, it'll be able to make up some dialogue that's complete.
I never even thought of that, but that is so true. And how cool will that be? I've been having interesting chats with Grok, asking Grok to be various people, and then I'll chat with them just to see what it thinks they would say. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So the point, you're absolutely right. They're going back to the author. Like, there are works of art which are controlled. Like you're only seeing what you're allowed to see. And yes, absolutely. In my sense was that there wasn't on the set of the HBO series a lot of actors just making up dialogue and saying, I really don't feel comfortable saying that. I'd like to say this. I mean, maybe it happened and they didn't talk about it, but I didn't, it wasn't that kind of set. Whereas on Succession, it definitely was that kind of set. So yes, Bella Ramsey is playing the character that she was told to play and scripted to play. There's no question about that.
The only critique I can see people making, and it's a fair critique of the choice of her, is and it's a very obvious one, is her size for what they were having her do in the show, which they never, at least in game 1, they didn't have her doing this kind of stuff. She is a keen and sneaky killer. She is not somebody who is going to outmuscle a 6-foot, 200-pound guy. Like, that's not happening. And they had her doing that in the show. And then, I don't know, there's too much to critique in this freaking show. It's like, you can't critique one thing without saying, and they also had to fix this so that this could work. It's ridiculous. Let me quickly read this comment. Kurt Feudale says, Grok, please write season 8 Game of Thrones that isn't absolute dog crap. LOL. I agree. Oh my gosh, how tempting.
I think we're going to see that pretty soon. Yeah, so, and I don't know where this came from. It's become a joke even among Generation Z, which it's aimed towards, where you have the 90-pound person throwing the 250-pound Russian hitman all over the place. And a show that did a different version of that really, really well was, I don't know if you're a fan of this, but I actually thought it was really well done. Remember, I don't think things are necessarily good or bad. I think they're successful or unsuccessful. The Terminal List, starring Chris Pratt.
I haven't seen it.
Chris Pratt is Chris Pratt, but and he plays this elite assassin, and there's a plot and everything. But there's a character in there who's a reporter, and she's played and is a woman of shorter stature who's a reporter. That's her job. She's a journalist, and she has a profound effect on the plot through her intelligence and her journalistic abilities. There's one scene there which I thought was a commentary on these other shows that feel they have to take highly intelligent, brilliant women who are good at something and just check the box that they can throw the Russian hitmen or the orcs 50 feet across the screen. In this Terminal List, Chris Pratt is running, and he comes upon some railing, and being the special forces guy, he just jumps over it. The young woman comes along, and she realizes, I'm not going to jump over this, so she carefully climbs over it. And I was thinking, in a lesser show, she would jump over it too. But it was a little commentary that, like, no, we're not claiming she becomes special forces. We're claiming that she is very good at achieving things with her own skills. And I think that's a question everybody's asked this question, right? Like, if you go on Reddit, everybody has asked, every Modern Family, The Middle, Seinfeld, everybody said, who on the show would you want as your companion in the post-apocalyptic scenario? Like, every television show, that's been a question somebody's asked. And
somebody in Seinfeld? Probably
who would you want? In Seinfeld, probably none of the above. First of all, New York City, I wouldn't want to be in New York City. I would want to be in Lubbock post-apocalypse. We've talked about this before. We all agree that the zombie apocalypse would last 15 minutes in Lubbock. Trust me, we'd take them all out right away. So you couldn't have it. But you can't convert people into something that they're not. So when Carol in The Walking Dead becomes a stone cold killer, she improves physically somewhat, but it's her intelligence and her willing to kill that gives her an advantage, that she gets to jump on people because she is figuring things out. And I think that's what I wish writers felt the confidence in doing, is saying, I'm not going to turn my character into somebody they're not. I'm going to make them successful in the quest with the strengths that they have.
I think that a huge portion of the general audience can smell BS, like Bella Ramsey taking out a 6 foot, 200-pound guy. And when we see that somebody has taken the time to or has written a story where they've recognized that there are physical limitations for every person, and it's going to be different for every person, or they have mental limitations, or they have emotional limitations. But recognizing that people have limitations is something that we all really we see it, and we respect it when it is respected. And when somebody throws out BS like what you're talking about, we feel like what you said, like this is cheapening the story. It's checking a box, trying to say, oh, well, she's strong too. I think it's very, very tempting to, well, we don't want to portray women as being weak, or we don't want to portray somebody with a disability as being disabled. And I'm like, that's the whole point of being disabled. That's the whole point of being a woman, is that you're not going to be able to do certain things that other people can do because they're a man or they're not disabled or whatever. But that gives you a unique perspective when you compare it to what's left. And so why not bring your audience into that limitation and explore what the possibilities are within that? That's why people like, I don't know if you're familiar at all with Avatar: The Last Airbender, but it's a cartoon series that people really loved, and it has a character who's blind in it. And they're like, we're going to have and she's one of the main characters, and people loved her because she's tough and she's grounded, but she's also very nervous when she cannot feel the ground. Like, she turns into, I am the damsel in distress. It happens to her a couple times during the series where she's not in her element, where she has strength, and she goes full on, I'm disabled. Like, I can't see, I can't do anything, I'm useless here. And she just relies on, like, help me, save me. And people appreciate that because they go, oh, dang, she's in a dangerous situation now. We don't want her to be in that. It creates that roller coaster as well for us, but it also recognizes that, hey, people have limitations, and that doesn't mean they're not strong. It just means they've got limitations. Everybody's got them. I wanted to be an astronaut. My family is we're a military family, but my family was in the space program, Operation Mercury and Gemini, and I wanted to go to space so bad. It was my dream. I was studying astrophysics for years, dropped out before my last year to switch over to English literature. I switched because I realized, because of my asthma and my medical history, I was never going to be entered into the space program. And I was like devastated. But I also would never have explored my writing talent. Or editing talent, I guess. But I think there are limitations that are going to stop people. And if you tell people over and over again that they don't exist, people aren't going to connect with it, because we all know deep in our hearts, we all have limitations. I'll never be able to flap my wings, my arms, and fly. Like, it just won't happen. So I think that the trend of giving people superpowers, apparently, like what you're talking about, every woman is a girl boss, no matter how big she is, she can take out the biggest, toughest guy. That's going to go away. I think this is a trend. I think it'll always come back every once in a while, but people always roll their eyes at it. But like what you said, earning it is another story, like Carol in The Walking Dead. I'm not familiar with this character. Elon can send you to space, Amber. Thanks. I wish he could. Believe me, if I knew SpaceX was coming up, I would not have changed my degree, probably, because I saw that NASA was like not doing well. But anyway, I think that taking your characters on journeys to acquire strength despite limitations, or to acquire strength overcoming limitations, that is such a great and interesting story, and so satisfying. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't know why people don't see the value in that. Maybe you've got, like, what do you see from your end? Like, go ahead and respond. I know I've been talking a while here.
No, I think that's a great question. Why would we go on a quest? It's not just to achieve an objective, like we get the grail or we destroy the dragon. We go on a quest to discover what's inside ourselves. right?
Mhm.
And what can be improved, and also what can be, repressed because
Yeah.
it's wrong. I mean, that's one of the fundamentals of storytelling. Um, I find it. I wonder though. You're saying it's going to disappear. I don't know. It's become so solidified that I worry that writers feel like, gosh. And again, sometimes Carol in The Walking Dead, this great reporter on the Terminal List. Sometimes when it's the stereotype, it's a modern stereotype. It really gets me when I see these Hollywood writers say we're subverting the stereotype. Subverting what? The 1937 stereotype? And that's brave.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, yeah, those 1937 Hollywood executives are going to come in and pound their fists and really, get angry at you. No, to subvert a 1937 stereotype is not brave. Subvert the 2025 stereotype, that's brave.
Yeah. And
So
what's
I
funny is
really
to subvert the 2025 stereotype is to go back to the 1945 stereotype. It really is, though. It's funny.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, again, I'm an old man, and it's cut off here, but I put my my nom de guerre as old man shaking cane. I actually have a cane over here to shake. But there were a lot of strong women during the golden era of Hollywood. You could never see a Maureen O'Hara movie and not be impressed by how strong she was.
Yeah.
And powerful within the space that was possible at that time.
Yeah.
Right. And within what was allowed there, she found a way. And this goes to the power of the actress. I mean, look, there's a lot of terrible things being said about this poor Bella Ramsey online. We're not going to repeat any of those. I don't want to make fun of her looks or her voice or something like that. I do think it's very hard for another HBO fantastic series, The Wire, established this now funny stereotype of these British actors who come in and they play an American role, and they do such a fantastic job. Key and Peele, look up Key and Peele, British actor, where they have a British actor playing a street thug, street tough. and The Wire had some amazing British actors who I didn't know. I didn't know Idris Elba when I first started watching The Wire was a British actor. He did such a great job. I think it really is tough to pull off a completely different accent throughout an entire TV series, especially when you're very, very young. That is a challenge. But the point was, they asked poor Bella Ramsey to do things which were not explained in the story space as being plausible for somebody, that character. It wasn't her fault. If we're going to say she was doing what the writing told her to do, then the physicality issue is certainly not her fault.
No. And that was the point that I was making about the one critique I think you could make, is that Bella being cast as a girl who's supposed to take out 6 foot tall, 200-pound guys, that was a poor choice. They should have picked someone who was bigger and tougher. But the thing is I highly doubt in the game that they have her doing the same kinds of things, because we haven't seen this character being built up like that. She seems to be the kind who will sneak around, who will take out an enemy from far away with a rifle instead of, getting up close and having a wrestling match with them, and, working within her character. But then for the show, they decided, well, we got to show that she's tough too. So let's have her wrestling a guy. The one thing I can say that the show did do that I was like, okay, they almost sort of made up for it, except that they did have her take out a guy later on in the series. But in that first wrestling scene with the guy in season 2 in the barn, Jesse explaining to her he was holding back. That's the only reason you thought you won. And I was like, oh, at least that. But I don't think that the show wanted us to think that she couldn't handle this guy at full force because of what we had her doing later on in the series, having her jump up on the guy when they were in Seattle, and it was her and Dina, and they were going to be found by the WLFs. They'd just seen the people strung up and, gutted, and then they're hiding from the WLFs who come in to cut them down, whatever. And then she jumps on the guy and wrestles him for several seconds, long enough that it was too long, before she pulls out her dagger and stabs him in the neck. And I'm like, that should have been the first thing that happened, is the knife in the neck. Like, you shouldn't have waited for that, but they wanted her to wrestle this guy. And that took the believability out of it for me.
That's the other thing. Okay. You have set up a narrative that there's this fungal takeover of people. Okay. Like the fungi take over people. Right. And the way I think The Walking Dead did it better. Like maybe they felt embarrassed to bring this up, but like, I guess headshots and like, I don't understand how just stabbing somebody in the head instantly kills a fungus. And like, a fungus has to, that makes no sense whatsoever. In The Walking Dead, it made more sense that like, you have to have a headshot that destroys the brain or something like that. But anyway, if I lived in that world where I for 20 years, or in terms of Ellie's character, had grown up, like she went to Fedra school, right? And to me, post-apocalypse, teaching kids like how to avoid becoming a zombie, virus, how to live in this post-apocalyptic world would be on the curriculum, along with Shakespeare and Amber and Voltaire, right? Okay, that would be on the curriculum. There's like how to survive. And I would take away, never, ever get into close combat. There's, you could be 300 pounds, but a 50-pound zombie, 50-pound fungi person is going to get lucky if he gets close enough to you. So the goal is to always go for the long shot, is always to be as far away as possible with your sniper rifle. Like, no, don't get into close combat. This
is why I got into the interpretation of her being a sociopath, or having some form of mental. She's unstable up there. She was off in some way, because they showed her in season 1 relishing or being fascinated when she would cut into the forehead of one of the infected. Remember, she and Joel went into this convenience store, and she climbs down into the basement by herself, even though she.
Oh, Amber, sorry, great comment.
Oh yes, never get into close combat unless you're Amber with a sword. No, you'd never get into an infight.
A long sword, a very, very long sword.
At least 2 inches longer than everybody else. Oh, quickly, I do want to thank Jay Smith for the $2 super chat. Thank you. Is this the heroine's journey in writing? The hero's journey for a woman is the same as it is for a man. It's just different limitations, as it should be for every single character that you have, no matter who they are. It seems like the heroine's journey today is that she becomes a super badass physically, in addition to whatever other journey that she's got, or she doesn't go through any growth at all. She's already super from the beginning. And then I think that's what the problem was with Disney's Mulan remake. I was like, the whole point of this story is that she's learning how to use her own strengths to be supportive to the military. And now you've taken that all away, and like, actually, she already had this. Like, well, then what are we rooting for exactly? Why? What do we want her to learn? What do we want her to do? We want her to reveal herself. Sorry, it's such a letdown of a premise. Is that, oh well, she's gonna hold herself back until she reveals herself at the end. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and let me say this. This is a very old question. I don't want to say that having a ninja hitman assassin woman is a bad thing. I mean, there are plots that call for that.
I like Black Widow in Avengers. Yeah. I remember her. I was like, I don't need her backstory to see that she became this great fighter. I believe that she has this cool ninja-like skill from the beginning. Yeah. I like that.
What we're saying is that you have to work. I think I've seen this in a boxing movie once. Is that like you have to work with the athlete that you have, right?
Yeah.
You can improve the physical form that you're given, but you can't become something completely different. And the way I think about it is that
or you have to be believably transformed.
Yes. Yeah. It's a plausible transformation. So I want to go back in time a couple more than 100 years this was an issue, one of the great novels that I'm not an English professor, but I do mention to students literature examples that affected the media, the visual media examples, the film and television, gaming examples that we talk about. And Flaubert's novel Salambo was probably one of the great novels of all time. And one of the criticisms is the title character Salambo it's set in ancient Carthage. And it's a war story and it's a love story. One of the criticisms which he talked about himself was that it was this pretty cute criticism. He made it of himself that it was a gigantic pedestal with a small statue. In that Salambo, the main character is mainly reactive. Things are happening until the very end. Things are happening, and she is being not quite a damsel in distress, but she's not being very active. And this is a question you and I asked before, and there's some other great YouTubers out there who've asked variations of this question, is that analytical, smart, necessarily physically active characters are hard to do in television and movies. It's harder to write for them. People who are thinking and maybe manipulating others to achieve their goals and pulling the right strings to achieve their goals. It's not considered to be as good television as, hacking somebody with a sword. But a lot of the very successful characters in literature, but also in like history, if you go back, look, take Cleopatra, right? I mean, Cleopatra didn't end well. I mean, who ends well necessarily, but like she didn't end well, but like she spent her entire life trapped in this situation of these other Rome being this superpower that was threatening her country of Egypt. And she kept finding ways to play Rome really well until, she couldn't anymore. But the point was that Cleopatra never once, grabbed a spear and, ran into the front line of her army and said, follow me. She would have never done that, but she would have, bribed, whispered, manipulated, diplomatized. She used all the weapons at her disposal at that time.
I've seen it. So I get asked or get this comment a lot, and this comes up whether it's in my job or on YouTube or in my Discord. People talking about how, you can only write characters that are as smart as yourself. So we've got a bunch of stupid writers. And I'm going, I disagree with that, because you definitely can write characters who are smarter than you. You have to manipulate the world around them and the story around them. But being smart typically means they're able to predict something that's going to happen in the future. And so if you line things up and create a character that can notice things maybe the reader didn't notice, you can make them smart. You can make them smarter than yourself. There are very few times where I've looked at a story and gone, I think you must have been a genius to have thought of this. And it's typically some sort of a weird cerebral idea that I just have never thought before. And I go, I'll bet if I was in this, okay, I'm thinking like the Matrix. Okay. Like the concept of the Matrix, that, they're using human beings as batteries. This isn't a genius idea, but a lot of people, when they saw this movie, had never heard a story like that before. And they were like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But you talk to the entire cyberpunk fandom and they all knew this story before. They all knew what it was about and how it worked. And it's all about, first of all, what your audience already knows. And then secondly, being able to manipulate your story, your characters, and your audience into thinking in a certain way. And then you create the revelations that make your character look smart. Sherlock Holmes is a great example of he's not a genius. I guarantee you that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was not a genius. He could never do the things that Sherlock Holmes could do. Oh wait, here's another good one. Okay, Criminal Minds is a TV show where they're like they're psychological analysts and they look for serial killers and stuff. There's a character on there who has a perfect memory. He can remember anything that he reads, and he can read super fast. And I'm like, you don't have to have that memory or be like that to write that character. All you need is the internet. And then you've got 2 weeks to write a 10-minute thing of dialogue that he's going to have to make him look super smart. That anybody can do this. It's just work. So I wouldn't say that we have writers who are not smart. I would say we have writers who are perhaps lazy. Not doing
I like
the work.
the word lazy because let's just take one example here, which happened consistently in the television series. And this is going back to Close Combat. I feel like if you are a writer in Hollywood and your character is being held at gunpoint by Russian hitmen, by bodyguards of the drug lord or something like that, or as happens like 10 times, and I'm thinking of the hospital sequence in season 1, okay, where Joel is told, okay, you're going to be walked out of here. And I actually turned to my family when we were watching this and I said, oh, these stupid guards are going to hold their machine guns and they're going to walk right next to him, like 1 inch away from him. Again, if you have a gun and somebody else does not have a gun,
don't be close enough.
Is your friend.
Yeah.
Do not, and this happens all the time. Like, okay, Mr. Bourne, these guards will take you out here, under guard with their guns. And of course, they walk like 3 inches away from Jason Bourne. It happens so often. I burst into laughter every time. And when Joel was walked off by the guards, I was saying, oh, really? That's so tired. It's boring that he's gonna spit or cough or something like that and turn around and like grab the gun. And they do. These poor guys, they've never, in Galaxy Quest where the red shirt extra says, have you guys ever watched the show?
Have you ever watched the show?
Like,
yeah.
You poor bodyguards, you Firefly bodyguards, you've never watched a post-apocalyptic show. You've never watched, it's possible. They're young guys. They grew up, they never watched a movie where if you're guarding somebody, guard them from 5 feet away with your machine gun. Don't walk right next to them. And then Joel goes through as a killing machine there. And again, these are trained. Yes, they're not like special forces, but like if they've survived this far in the apocalypse, this would be common knowledge. They have some knowledge of fighting.
Yeah.
And so forget Bella Ramsey for a minute as Ellie. Joel is made too much into the ultimate ninja warrior there. They could have sat down. This is what this drives me nuts. This is not a student production.
No. They should be smarter than that.
North High School, okay, or
this
Banff.
Is HBO.
Yeah, this is an unlimited budget, right? Like anything they called there, if they'd said, and then the city blows up, they would have blown up a city. Whatever they write, they can make happen with their budget, right? So they sat there and they said, like, how is Joel going to get the drop on these guards which are guarding him? Oh, yeah, let's have them walk really close to him and turn around and grab the guns and then go through and shoot everybody. That is just so bad. No student defended that. They've all watched shows. All of them know.
Yeah.
If in the future they're ever guarding somebody, I'm utterly confident all of my students will be better guards than any television or movie.
That is okay. So this is going to tie into Valerie. You've been super chatting me a lot this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie.
As an aspiring writer and currently writing a story of my own, well, first of all, good job on that. What's one common storytelling technique or trope you would choose to avoid and why? I know this is going to sound like a cheap answer, but there is no storytelling technique or trope that I would tell you to avoid because any technique or trope can be done well or poorly. Now, if we want to stay on topic of what Dr. Perlmutter and I are talking about, here's what you should never do. Never make your enemy stupid so that it makes your hero look smart, because it doesn't make your hero look smart. It just makes your hero look not as stupid as the bad guys. You'd never want to create incompetence so that another character looks competent. If you can't figure it out on your own, talk to people. Writing a great story is far more of a collaborative effort than I think people realize. Your book is always going to go through editors and various levels of critiquing, and you're going to show it to friends and they'll give you reactions and you'll think about it and maybe ask them, what would you do? Or maybe they come up to you with an idea. Collaborate and don't be afraid to collaborate. Maybe somebody says something that inspires a new idea for you that solves a problem you were having. But yeah, Dr. Perlmutter, that problem is really big, and it really annoys people as well, is when they see situations, they're like, if I was doing this and I'm not in an apocalypse, I'm just a 40-something-year-old sitting at home on my couch eating pretzels, I still would not be this stupid. It's very annoying. This is why we like smart television. This is why we like shows that really challenge us and make us think. And we go, I didn't see anybody do anything stupid. I didn't see anybody do anything that was contrived. It all worked. It was really well done. I feel more surprised, typically, the whole let's subvert expectations. My expectations are subverted when everybody's smart and they still, the goal is still accomplished. My brother has a great saying. I keep saying it, and I have said it a few times in my Last of Us reviews. It's like, I'm not rooting for the bad guy. I'm rooting for competence. Because he found himself rooting for the villain in some story. And he's like, yes. You know what? It had nothing to do with this character being likable or charismatic or anything. I just liked that he knew what he was doing and was doing it well. I'm just rooting for competence. Save yourself. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just say on what you said previously? Then thank you. Save yourself. That's a great comment. Joel is described several times as capable, and I really like that. I thought that was a great word to use, especially in the life or death world that they were living in. Right? Mm-hmm. That somebody is capable. I want somebody capable on my side. Somebody capable on my team. And the point is that 20 years after the apocalypse, I have to say, I only think capable people will be left.
Yeah.
If in this story space, if it's really a story space where they keep bringing up the raiders, that there's gangs of raiders and there's Fedra and there's rebels against Fedra. And I don't know who are worse, but they're Firefly. The point is that they're not creating this world where like, everybody has gotten together and sings Kumbaya. They're talking about in terms of like, philosophy, all against all, right? The end product of that would be pretty much only capable people would be left. So it's even more insulting to have dumb, incompetent villains who easily are overcome, which is consistent to make the hero look good. You do not make, so going back to Valerie, exactly what Amber, the genius storyteller consultant, says is that don't make your villains prop up your plot to make your hero look good. If your hero should solve the problems that they face with their intelligence and their capabilities, not because other people blew it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much Ellie's entire, everything that she did in The Last of Us Season 2 was either by luck or somebody did something dumb. She did not once do anything smart and win. Not once. The only reason she beat the girl, remember the bald girl in the hospital? The bald girl would have gotten away from her if it weren't for them falling into the spore level, right? Like, oh, too bad for you. You can't breathe spores. Well, I can. Ha! Joke's on you. Like, nothing that she did was because of her competence, because she was a great fighter or she was clever. It was all because of luck. Even the stupid freaking boat thing, and then almost getting hanged, and then, oh, the horn has been blown. Quick, leave her. Don't kill her. It was bizarre and ridiculous. I was cracking up through most of that because it was just so weird. And HBO is so much better than this that it was a shock to me that they gave the green light to this script. Somebody at HBO must have read this script and said, no way. I can't. They're much better than this, usually. I don't know, maybe they've lost some people and Apple hired all of them because Apple is winning right now, as far as the streaming service is concerned. But yeah, never make your character, your bad guys incompetent or have event. They call it Deus Ex Machina to a degree. It is like, oops, they got stupid, or whoops, there's this big accident that happened, and now you're suddenly on this island or whatever. It having things happen for no reason at all. They weren't things that your character did to make them happen. You can do that once in a while when the script calls for it, or when the storytelling allows for something like that to happen, and it doesn't take away from your audience, your main character still being smart. Matter of fact, I kind of like it when it's thrown in there and it throws off your hero.
Yeah, and Save Yourself here. Thank you for your comment.
Yes.
And that's interesting. I have not played Mass Effect. I read the script because my students kept bringing it up. Maybe less. There's fewer of them playing it now, but like 5-10 years ago, when we would discuss like what was the smartest game, like where the characters were the most interesting, most smart, Mass Effect was always number one on the list. So thank you, Save Yourself, about pointing out Mass Effect.
I've heard of that one as well. I'm so sorry to all these people who came to me from The Last of Us. I do not usually play video games. I've literally never played one. I just sit down and created characters in Fable or something, and I was like, yay. Yeah, if any, I think we will remember and enjoy watching smart characters far more than unintelligent characters. After a while, they become boring because you don't marvel at how did the writers think to do this. And to me, it just takes work. It takes work and rewrites. And, if you have a character that you want to do a certain thing and you're having trouble justifying how they get to that point, you may have to change your entire story before that. Or if you write yourself into a corner and you realize, oh crap, I can't get my character out of this corner, maybe you got to kill them off.
I also like the arc of when you have a brilliant character who eventually outsmarts themselves. And let's talk about Lord Lannister in Game of Thrones, where, he's so smart and he outplays his opponents time and time again.
Yep.
Until he doesn't. There's a great line in history. I mean, it's attributed to a Greek statesman, Solon. Count no man happy until he's dead. And I really like that plot development in games or movies or TV shows, streaming, whatever, when you have a brilliant character who acts brilliantly, but maybe starts to believe that they can't be wrong. I mean, this happens in Hollywood all the time, right?
Yeah.
So it's very familiar. And it happens to authors all the time, as they think they can't write a bad book, or they can't, or painters who can't paint. I mean, that's very interesting to play with too, is when you have a villain who is smart, but then they outsmart themselves at some point.
I think I don't recall what the term was. I think it was the demonic hero, but it's basically when you have to swallow your hubris, and it typically ends like what you're talking about, where it's somebody who's so clever, they're doing everything right, and then that ends up being their downfall. Either they get too much of a head on their shoulders and they can't look down anymore at where they're walking, or their plans circle around to bite them in the ass. Excuse me for the language. I would say like the Red Wedding is one of those situations as well, where you're with these characters who have this history and they just assume that the past is in the past, and it certainly isn't. And it was stupid of them to assume anything else. But I think we can appreciate when that sort of thing happens in storytelling, because we see it happen in real life. Like you said, this is what happened. We see it in Hollywood all the time. We see it happening with people where suddenly the genius doesn't seem like such a genius anymore, even though they have not changed. Maybe they haven't changed a whole lot, but the world cannot sustain somebody who is like, well, I'm thinking specifically of like a narcissist or something, somebody who's very charismatic and everybody will follow them, but then you find out they're only in it for themselves. Eventually that person is going to fall because they can't people won't stick around and be loyal to that unless they're being manipulated. And a manipulative person isn't a powerful person. Or I mean, a manipulated person is not a powerful person, and you cannot sustain your own power. You have to receive it from other people. Other people give you power. You don't necessarily give yourself power.
That's a question I have for you and for the audience, because I love discussing about the structure of society as well as individuals, because we've been talking a lot about individuals, but one thing the show does is it creates these different types of post-apocalyptic societies. And sometimes, honestly, I didn't understand completely what the show was cheering for or was approving.
Are you thinking specifically of season one?
Yeah,
that was the
Yeah, I mean, in season one, we're given Fedra, where you have a lot of. I mean, I guess you're sacrificing freedom for safety, right? Because you're literally living inside a wall, everything. But okay, let me back up a second here.
I know where you're going with this. Go ahead.
Apocalypse. The first thing you got to do is start farming, okay? Because the canned food's only going to last so long. The gasoline goes, I think, after a year. They play with that a little bit. Yeah, there's some additives you can. I've looked this up. You can add to gasoline, but basically, unless you're doing the Road Warrior, where you're pumping your own gas and refining your own gas, you're going to be running out of gas. If you live near a Costco and everybody else is dead, you're probably going to survive a long time on canned food. But generally, you got to go out and start farming. And it's to me, it was just really weird that Boston is where you would be, and there's no way they were feeding all these people based upon, and they didn't even start any little gardens. There was no horticulture. It seemed really weird. But the point was that they were setting up these separatist societies, and this is where the writing really failed for me. Because they had the Fed. Now there were some good moments, like when the Fedra officer is talking to young Ellie and saying, "You got some paths you got to go here." You humanized the empire a little bit there. Okay, so that's good, right? But then when they go to the Wyoming community, and by the way, Wyoming is not where I would settle post-apocalypse. It's in terms of farming and are you really getting fertilizer shipped in from okay. And then you get a tour of the Wyoming community, and I think there's one line which really was unintentionally hilarious, where they're walking along and saying, "What is it? This is our religious center," which is interfaith, of course. And and I was going okay, I mean, I understand.
It was the utopia.
But was it?
No,
what was that?
It shouldn't have been. The thing is, here's what I think's going on is, first of all, there was this fantastic world of opportunity was created with the event of the apocalypse and cordyceps. I think this was great. I think that there were a lot of really cool stories they could have gotten into, especially, how does a community survive? And you had a couple of examples. You had Fedra in Boston, and then you had Fedra offshoot in Kansas that was not really working out. And then you get it. You have these different pockets. You had the religious cult, and then you have Jackson Hole or Jackson. A lot of people are saying it's not Jackson Hole. They call it Jackson Hole, but anyway, I mean, not in the show, but in real life. So I don't think that the stories that were being told in this world complemented the world very much. I think it's just here's this amazing world, and we're just going to kind of forget that it exists while we do all this other stuff, because they didn't really play with the world. And it's unfortunate, because I wanted to see this world explored. That was a personal preference. But I think it was also a detriment to the storytelling, because it called into question, well, what about the world as it is right now? Like what you're talking about. You get into Wyoming and you're going, or other places, first of all, why are they here? How are they farming? Are they canning everything? Where is the sustainability coming from? And all kinds of other questions come up when you've set up this fantastic world. It almost feels like you had a writer with one idea, and then another idea and said, maybe I can stick the two of them together because it feels like two different kinds of stories that are coming together here.
I feel like this was I'm old enough to have watched the second Star Wars trilogy, the prequels, in the theater. And I remember going to the theater just so excited. I was an adult, but I had seen Star Wars, the original Star Wars, I guess Episode 4, A New Hope, in the theater. We didn't know it was Episode 4 at that time.
That must have been a thrill.
Yeah. And I went back to see it 9 times. By the way, that's another critique of modern Hollywood, is that they make all their money the first couple of weeks, and then almost invariably, with some exceptions, Sinners apparently is an exception. With some exceptions, the box office steadily goes down. Star Wars, Jaws
went up.
That's how you tell you really have a great movie, is word of mouth gets more people to come to the theater, and it builds and builds and builds and builds. So I remember watching the prequels, the first one, and I started getting really uncomfortable, and I felt like, oh, they have to check the box of democracy, right? So we have, a princess, but she's a hereditary monarch, but she's elected, and so this planet elected a 19-year-old girl to be their prime minister, and how does that work? And this is how democracy. I still feel Hollywood has a democracy problem. They feel that they have to be registered as cheering liberal democracy, even in situations where you think, like, would that be actually the most logical form of government? Exactly, a parliamentary democracy and religious freedom for all, and wouldn't the apocalypse take a chip out of that, in terms of like situations? And I felt like they do interesting stuff, like in Kansas City, where apparently was a Fedra place. It collapses, and of course the rebels, are busy killing everybody and getting revenge, right? Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful line from the poet Yeats: "Too long a sacrifice leaves a stone of the heart." And he was talking about, if you spend your life committed to revolution and violence, when you have power, you're not going to suddenly be, nice guy. So the Fireflies,
that was a good story. I like that the bad guys, the rebels were just as bad in their own way. I liked that. But I think so. Okay, I didn't really quite get to finish what I was thinking, because I forgot what I was thinking about the whole creating a world and stories, and they don't quite fit together because they sort of don't need each other to exist. There was also, I think, this attempt to leave things open to interpretation in season 1, and then especially when we get to season 2, saying, actually, no, it goes this way. But at the same time, you have things like Jackson and saying, this is what utopia is like. This is great. And it's always portraying this is excellent. And then you get to the other places, like the religious cult with David and the cannibalism, like, okay, this is bad. It's bad if you follow like one leader like this. And then you get to Kansas, and you're like, okay, the rebels who are taking over are bad. Like, it has to be a commune, a community of everybody. We are all equal. Like that's the only thing that's going to work in this. It's hard to tell a story where you're going to say certain things are open to interpretation and other things are not. And one of the ways you say that things aren't open to interpretation is when you showcase them as being, this is the clearly good option and the others are bad. That is a statement. That is not being left open to interpretation. If you're not going to show why Jackson doesn't work, you're saying this works. They even have Ellie say it, this actually works. So it's, I think it's more of like I want to, what you're saying, like a checkbox almost, like they can't conceive of, anything other than democracy will work. I think maybe there's a fear of leaving things open to interpretation to some degree.
Trusting the audience. This all comes down to this, is that I feel modern Hollywood, this is going back to smart people, right? Mm-hmm. How many times have we seen in the movie NASA? Okay, everybody in the scene is a NASA employee. There's a meteor heading towards the Earth, and the head of NASA says, explain that to me in English. I'm willing to go out on a limb that no professor of astrophysics has ever said, explain that to me in English. And no member of NASA has said to another member of NASA, explain that to me in English. I actually love it. I was talking about this with my students. In the 1960s and 70s, there was a trend when in World War II films, they would show Germans, they wouldn't translate. No subtitles, no dubbing, because they were trusting the audience would pick up that these German officers are yelling and pointing to the map of France and saying that Americana Normandy, that we would figure it out.
Yeah.
We didn't have to have translated, well, I don't think the Americans will land at Normandy. That's just ridiculous. We've gone the exact opposite direction now, where I think the studios, I'm the one who says this, it's not the suits' fault as much as the writer's fault. Maybe we disagree, but I think the suits and the writers.
Oh no, I think it's both.
Unbelievably untrusting of audiences. Thank you, Demigod.
Thanks for hanging around. No, I think it's both. And I think it's funny. We just had a discussion about Andor in my Discord because I've got a poll running in my Discord right now where I'm trying to decide what show I'm going to review next. I was like, I got to have something good. Like The Last of Us was supposed to be my mostly good show that I could like enjoy, but then have a few little things to critique. And it didn't turn out to be that. But I was looking at Andor as a possibility, and I've watched a couple episodes of that, and there's a whole planet where every time we flash over to this planet, it's one of the characters' backstories, and every episode we're getting several scenes from this backstory. It's all in some alien language, no subtitles.
Yes.
At all. And I can clearly understand everything that's going on. And you know, some people like it, some people don't. I loved it because I was like, I didn't need the subtitles. I understand the sentiment.
By the creators of Andor, we're going to be different. We're going to trust you, the audience.
Yeah. Just like you watch that the first episode, and I have a thing with dialogue lately. I do not enjoy dialogue anymore because the majority of it is just talking, telling garbage at this point. There are very few shows that come out and I go, dang, that was good dialogue. I am more rooting for silence and just letting the actors act, let them do stuff and tell us with their body language. And Andor did that. Like the first episode, the first few scenes, we barely get anything, but we understand this guy is in a dangerous place. He's going to this brothel and he's looking around, and then we don't understand why until he says, I'm looking for my sister. And we don't have to have somebody say, you're such a good person. We get it. He's in a dangerous place looking for his sister, who he cares about a lot, obviously. And then this horrible things happens to him on his way away from this brothel. We didn't need anybody to explain any of this. We just went on this journey with this character, and we figured it out as we were going. And he played I'm capable in a shady place, but I'm also, you can see that I'm a good guy. He was well cast. He has a friendly kind of face. They did a good job with no dialogue or no telling whatsoever. And I enjoyed it. I was like,
isn't it beautiful?
It's so nice. It's refreshing.
This is another thing that really bothered me. Okay, again,
I can't speak for the greatness of the show. I heard it's great, but I haven't seen it. But
yeah, I don't know whether it's fun to do a critique of an excellent show. But anyway, in The Last of Us, going back to The Last of Us for a second, this drives me nuts. 20 years into the apocalypse, you have learned to shut up.
Yes.
Right? I realize it's not a quiet place, but like 20 years into the apocalypse, if you're walking through the woods, if you're walking through a city, they were nervous at silence. The people who made this apparently were just nervous that we could have had 3 minutes of Joel and Ellie walking through the woods, listening. There's a crackle. Wouldn't that have been perfect and right and plausible and beautiful? But instead, Ellie has to keep walking. I mean, Ellie would get me killed.
Yes, she would get anybody killed.
I wouldn't want Ellie on team Perlmutter.
I think I said it in my reviews. Like,
okay,
Jackson would have expelled
her. You're voted off the island. You're out, Ellie. Yes. Sorry, I don't care if you're a small child. You're voted out unless you're
going to get us all killed.
You're going to get me killed.
Yeah,
and she does actually. She like repeatedly finds situations where she's the one who gets them in in trouble. Don't yammer. There's no yammering post-apocalypse. Shut up.
That to me is another example of, I don't think that they understood the world they were writing in. Like they were not writing a story that fits this post-apocalyptic world. Again, it just screams of like either multiple heads making the final decisions, which is a bad idea. Should be one person in charge of the final decisions, and then just not an unfamiliarity. I'm not very good at speaking extemporaneously. A lack of experience in writing in a limited, non-real world scenario like the apocalypse created by cordyceps. You have to pay attention to the rules you have set up. These are sound-sensitive creatures. You cannot just walk around talking. And I mentioned this in my review, which isn't out yet because I'm still editing it, but in the game, they talk, but they're talking and it's established early on that they can't hear you. Like you'll see the zombie guys walking around like in a hallway and you're like hiding behind this bench and they're talking to each other. And I'm like, oh, this is like stage whispering in video games. They are talking at a volume that we, the audience, can hear, but the understanding is they're talking quietly enough that those guys can't hear it. And so
the humans can hear you, right? Yeah. Like dangerous raider humans who are going to murder you can hear you.
No, in the video game, it's established that this volume of speaking and the way they are doing it is something that the TV show. You're good. The bad guys can't hear. When you translate this over to the TV show, that rule does not apply. You have to film it like it's film. We won't accept that in a movie. You cannot do that unless you're going to stage it, in kind of a quirky, looks like a theater play kind of way. So that way we get the idea, oh, this isn't actually representing real life. The thing about the way that The Last of Us is shot is that it's supposed to be like you're there with them. This is real. This is how it goes. They should be whispering to each other like this if they're talking, Could anybody hear that? I think so. They could. But the idea is you can't do the same thing in film that you can in a video game, and you can't do the same things in a video game that you can do in film. You have to apply the rules. This is part of adaptation and translation from one medium to another. So I would have, that bothered me a lot. And again, it really reeks of I'm not familiar with how to write within the rules of the world I've created. So
yeah, and actually, this is a great tip that you're giving to would-be world builders, whether it's gaming or television or movies or something. It's like, don't be afraid to use silence. Don't feel you have to have constant, snappy dialogue, especially since the average person can't write fantastic, snappy dialogue for every character all the time. That's the other thing that sort of gets me. When characters start to sound the same, because of course the author's the same, and so the snappy dialogue just sounds like, wait a minute, 60-year-old guy talking to 13-year-old girl, and the dialogue is identical because the author isn't taking into account that they're different people. But just silence is okay. It's wonderful.
I once had this thought that, I have to help people distinguish characters in their manuscripts a lot because that is a problem. They all kind of sound the same. They have the same kind of humor. They all have the same mannerisms and stuff. It's always a good sign to me when somebody has taken a character that already exists and like, this is my inspiration for this character. And I go, okay, like you understand that you can't have the same character for each person or just, they manifest out of the ether in my brain. You've established distinct personalities to each one, or you're attempting to do that. But quite often I get the whole, they all feel the same. And that's one of the first things you do is, try assigning a character that already exists, that has a strong personality, pretend this is that person and rewrite all of their dialogue and their actions and their thoughts, because a different character is going to have different way of thinking, a different way of speaking. They will react to different things than other people will. A good example is like, what if you've got somebody who is colorblind or somebody who is deaf? How are they going to react to certain situations differently from everybody else? You have to really think about it at that extreme level. It's not just in the words they say, because the temptation is this, and I've had it before myself, is why don't I just get somebody to come in here to rewrite all their dialogue? The dialogue alone is not going to be enough of a change. It's got to be down to the way that they think. Think about Roman in Succession.
Yeah.
He's pretty distinct from his siblings in the way he acts and behaves. I'm thinking specifically of the D pick, right? And just his clumsiness. Like you have to take into consideration that being a different character changes everything about them, not just the way that they speak. The way that they speak will definitely be something that maybe you have to work on yourself because you struggle to write the dialogue. But I think that a good starting point is imagine this is a different character. Pick somebody from a different IP, a different story, and say, this is that person, and then this is this other person, and make it as different as possible because you're going to struggle already to make them distinct. Kurt, let me read this really quick. Kurt Feudale. Oh, colorblind would be kind of fun for a screen character. Shoot all their alone shots in black and white would be kind of cool. That would be cool. Somebody should do that. But that's the idea is, you give them not just different sounding dialogue, but they have to down to the fundamentals of who they are and how they interact with other characters. That's what changes with them. Are they somebody who interrupts everybody like me? Or
one assignment that I give to students is to go into a setting where they're forced to be with, not necessarily talk with, but just listen to people who are not them, right? So like visit your grandma when she's having her friends over and just quietly listen to their conversation and think about what their tone, their pace, their choice of words, their metaphors and allusions, their cultural references. And you begin to learn how radically different, just a generational difference, let alone a cultural difference, let alone a national difference can be.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes I think a lot of people in Hollywood, they've gone to film school and then they're writing, and there's no like intersectional
world experience.
Yeah, where go backpacking in Thailand or something. I mean, volunteer somewhere and listen to people who are not you. Because if you're going to write somebody who's not you, you might want to listen to people who are that way.
And this, I think, shows on a larger scale in their writing as well. With in fantasy, especially, we saw this problem in Wheel of Time, having multiracial world everywhere. Every town is multiracial, and it does take out the realism. And he well, it's fantasy. You can do whatever you want in fantasy. And like some fantasy, as far as multiracial settlements and geography
and multi-faith
and multi-faith
in Wheel of Time, that would be really that would be the absurdity, right? I mean, yeah.
Well, the thing is like it works in certain fantasy, but not in all. And I'm actually I recently decided I saw How to Train Your Dragon, the adaptation, and it's good. I really liked it. I know you're gonna be like, what? But they did the whole, we're turning these Vikings multiracial. And I was like, oh, great. What the freak are they doing? Like, they're doing this yet again. And I'm going to do a whole video on how they actually did it. And it worked this time. Like, why was it appropriate for this fantasy, but it is not for all fantasy? And it really shouldn't be. And this is, so we're getting to the whole sheltered writers thing. I've only been to LA once in the last like 5 years. And I was like, I could see how people would live here and assume this is what the rest of the world looks like if this is like where you live. But you travel most places in the world and that are not first world countries, especially, and people clump together. Race, geography, and culture are regional mostly. And if you don't have an easy way of quickly transporting back and forth, they're all going to look very much the same. So when you have multiracial two rivers in the Wheel of Time, it just does not work because we're like, they're supposed to be isolated. They're supposed to have had hardly any contact with the rest of the world. And suddenly people from all over the world know about the Two Rivers handicrafts. Like, how do they know that? Like, what? They're like some cultural hub now, apparently. And it takes away from what the whole point of the Two Rivers people are, is that, this is a very sheltered little village. And now you've got these kids who are supposed to go off into the world and they suddenly learn that the world is a complicated place. Well, so the idea that you have people in the writing room who can't even conceive of what it would be like to live elsewhere, it does also make me wonder what sort of entertainment they consume. You can learn so much just from reading, just from watching TV. So I actually grew up next to a famous Arizona writer named Tom Levine. And I loved a series. He's got a channel here. He writes very edgy teen drama, and it's part of like the Arizona curriculum here. And he also writes like gritty horror. But he put out a series where he talks about how to learn to write well just through movies and shows, because that's how he learned how to write, and also theater. He was involved in theater too. But he learned a lot of his skill just from being a good observer. You just have to be good at observing. You can learn so much from reading. You can learn so much from watching good shows that are not necessarily just the ones that are, you know, hey, this is another story that takes place in Los Angeles in 2020. Expand your horizons a little bit, and then put yourself in there. You know, put the work into imagining what would this be like. And yeah, obviously real world experience helps, but you don't have to be a world traveler to know certain things about the world that apparently the people who adapted Wheel of Time did not understand.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in Los Angeles, and actually Los Angeles is a fantastic laboratory of this, because you have many different cultures accessible 5 miles away. I mean, I believe there are more Korean, national ethnic Korean people who live in Los Angeles than in the capital of Korea. You know, I mean, if you want to like do an expedition to spend some time with people who are not you, Los Angeles is easier to do that than most places. So that's what gets me, is that like really you know, you've lived in Los Angeles, but I guess you've lived in your own segregated area of Los Angeles, only to talking to people like you, but yet your fantasy world is where everybody is mixed together. But you show no sign of during your lifetime actually gone and learned anything from anybody outside of your group. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
There. So I mean, it's also to me insulting to other cultures, this homogenization of culture. You know, it's saying that in the future, when everything is better, there will be no cultures that are different from the monolithic culture, right? Everybody will live the same way.
I think that there's going to be we're going to see a shift in the idea of, okay, like right now it's very popular to think like everybody comes together as like a one world, you know, we all are living in peace and like we all live under the same rules. I think that we are going to have a shift in popular culture, in literature, in entertainment, where we see that actually some separation is desirable. We're going to see that, and maybe that they can't live together, but they can cooperate with each other. As I think that is because, you know, what is it? I can't remember what it's called, but the idea that things are cyclical, that we see certain patterns throughout history, things becoming popular, and then the antithesis becomes popular, and then the antithesis of that becomes popular, which was actually the first thesis. Like it goes like this, and I think that that's what's coming next. Is we'll see that.
I'm going to just give you a perfect example of, you're absolutely right about the cycle. So my father was also a professor. This is my family business, and however, he wasn't always a professor. For part of his life, his full-time job was to try to kill as many Germans as he could. He was in a destroyer, and there were Germans in U-boats under the water, and they were trying to kill him, and he was trying to kill them. And then afterwards, he went on for his PhD, and his dissertation in 1948, which I've read, was about this radical idea that after World War II, that all these people, these people had as their full-time job to kill people who were different than them, mm-hmm. that they could undo that and work together. So he ended up becoming a business professor in management, and he wrote his dissertation about this. Now get this, I know this is crazy. Italians, French, English people, Americans, in an office working together without killing each other, with Germans too.
That's like fantasy stuff.
Total fantasy, could never happen, right? Japanese doing business with Americans, total crazy fantasy. Well, no, the point was after World War II, there was this moment there where a lot of people were saying, gosh, we just went through the apocalypse. Remember, we've been through several apocalypses as human beings. People talked about genetic bottlenecks. There's these theories that certain times in our history, we've been down to like either 1,000 or 3,000 individuals. But like World War II, my mother survived the German occupation of Greece. That was the apocalypse for the Greek people. It was the apocalypse for the Polish people. It was apocalypse for many people, World War II. And the idea that we would emerge from that and build a world where we could find a way to work together without having another apocalypse 20 years later. Because remember, if you were in World War II, then you remember, gee, didn't we have a big war like 20 years earlier? So there were a lot of people who thought, 1962, we'll just do it all over again, Yeah. So the point is, yes, that nobody was saying Japanese people have to like shed all their culture, all their everything and become Americans. Nobody was saying that Germany has to forget its literature. They were saying we've got to respect the positive aspects of everybody's culture and work together for common goals. That's the quest narrative. That's the Fellowship of the Ring. Nobody was telling dwarves, stop being dwarves. Put aside your dwarfishness.
This was a major theme in the Wheel of Time as well regarding the sexes. So I have not finished this book series yet, but it's quite obvious from what I have read. And from what my patrons, who are all big fans of Wheel of Time, the books, have told me, is that the final lesson is men and women are different, but they will only succeed, the world will only flourish if they learn to work together despite their differences and provide their own unique contributions to the effort. And we saw that, we saw an attempt to subvert that in the show, and it's a very blatant disregard for one of the founding themes of the book series, and it just didn't work. So getting to like what we have right now, it's this: everybody is the same, everybody is, there's no sexes, there's no races, there's no differences in culture. Like, we're trying to blend everything together. It will be very boring, I think, for storytelling, first of all. But I do think that we're going to see that trend go. We're going to see something come in that celebrates difference, or that shows that there's greater potential for excellent storytelling when you do take those things. Okay, the trad wife trend was that's the antithesis to the women empowerment and sexual revolution, right? So, I mean, we're just sort of seeing the trad wife now starting to like, okay, it's been established, and now that's going to go. Something else will come in. I don't know what, but that's just the way that it goes. And I'm hoping we're going to see that in writing, where we've got a lot of crap in TV, but we've had some real good things come out lately. The How to Train Your Dragon adaptation is one of the first animation to live action adaptations where they're like, you know what, we're going to follow what the original did, and we're not going to add anything to it. We're going to honor everything that it did before, and maybe not do it exactly the same way, but we're not going to try to say, oh, well, this is different, or, oh, we need to add this different perspective in here. They didn't do any of that. They didn't shove something in there. They just took what was already there and said, let's let this blossom open a little bit more. That's all they did. And I think it was going to be a big hit. And I think that we're going to see more and more doing this. We're going to see more and more productions of adaptations being faithful to the source material, which means you can't do the stuff that's trendy today. This story is successful from 20 years ago because it did things that are great, and we still love it now. So just take that and do it now. Don't try to say, well, we have to change it for audiences today. You trust your source material. Trust your source material, and don't buy into
the stereotype.
Well, don't
good comment here from Kurt. Kurt is making a good comment here about, when you don't respect the beauty of distinct cultures, of saying that, yeah, they're different cultures and they may have different attitudes, and those attitudes may not be approved by the San Francisco City Council. I mean, just it's possible. You travel all over the world, especially if you watch television. I like to watch our family. We like to watch shows from around the world, and I'm bored if they look like they're trying to sound like Americans. If I'm watching a Turkish program and I feel I'm getting insights into Turkish culture, and yes, we live in a global media world, and I teach a class on basically introduction to global communication, and I talk about, like, yes, the world has been Americanized at some level. Like, if you go to a mountain in Nepal and you talk about Mass Effect or the latest NBA star, you're very likely to have some young kids there going, oh yeah, I love playing Mass Effect, right? So I mean, so like we live in a global culture, but we also can't globalize everybody's culture. Before we cut out, I just want to say, I in the folder, did you put it, that intro from the?
I did.
Okay, yes. I want to tell everybody.
Yeah, go ahead and introduce what it is.
Again, I'm only picking on HBO. Always punch up, never punch down, especially if you're in an apocalypse. Although I guess you might have to punch down. There is a Swiss detective show called Wilder, Wilder. I sent Amber the intro sequence for it. It is the exact same intro sequence.
It is exactly the same.
Like shot for shot intro sequence as The Last of Us. Wilder was made first. I don't understand that. I don't understand how anyone at HBO greenlit that intro sequence, which looked derivative from Game of Thrones anyway. But again, this goes to show just this lack of confidence. They couldn't come up with an original intro sequence. So they said, yeah, we want to get the Game of Thrones audience here. So we'll duplicate, but this Wilder sequence of this obscure but really good Swiss TV show, I don't understand that.
How old is the show?
The show with the
Wilder?
This was the season 2 of Wilder. I forgot season 1's intro. I should have looked it up.
Roughly how old is it?
2020.
Oh, okay, so it's like 5 years. Oh, wait, when did the first season of The Last of Us came? Well, that was only 2 years ago, right? Yeah, so that wasn't that long ago. So it wasn't, yeah. Okay. So let me play it really quick and you guys can see what we're talking about. So here is the intro to Wilder. It's exactly like what they were doing in the Last of Us. But I don't really have a problem with copying something that is working but doing your own thing. We see it done so much with the attempt to replicate the Game of Thrones intro. I remember when The Mandalorian came out and it was just like a 4-second title sequence, I was like, there, that was it. That was the winner. It just plays that like iconic now theme. Plagiarism is the sincerest form of flattery and plagiarism. It is. It's the thing is.
Yeah, but let's and I know we need to wrap up now.
Okay.
I grew up a long time ago, but like I saw HBO become the dominant form of artistic breakthrough television, the dominant platform. I watched The Sopranos. I watched a bunch of other HBO shows. HBO and Succession did this for me. Game of Thrones, the first 4.5 seasons did this for me, where HBO was just this apex of what television could be. Mm-hmm. Like when Pixar used to be like the apex of what modern animation could be. And come on, HBO. You can spend $200 million and you can do better. We're cheering for you.
Yeah, I think that it's part of the cyclical nature of all things is that there will be the rise and fall of empires and of movie studios, and I think we are seeing the slow fall of HBO. There hasn't been a really good show to come out of it in a while, and Apple, we've seen several. I think that they're at risk of losing it, but they've got some really good stuff on there right now that is still going. So if they can hold on to whoever those people are, or figure out whatever hiring practices they use to get those people to continue to do that, you will live a little bit longer than some other studios have. But yeah, I was going to say though that as far as intros go, I have not seen an intro quite like the Severance intro ever before. It's bizarre. And I guess they found the artist on Instagram. I went and looked up his artwork and I was like, no way in hell would I have ever looked at this artist's work and said, yes, I want that for my intro, because it's weird, so weird. But that intro works perfectly for the bizarreness of the storytelling and the style of the storytelling. Let me read this comment real quick here. From Kurt Feudale. Don't lie, Mr. Perlmutter. We know you would punch down at a zombie baby. I
do think we've agreed that all the fans of Sword and Pen will form an alliance post-apocalypse. Will be a fantastic team. I think
they will all learn how to sword fight and write good stories.
I think some of us will have sniper rifles, some of us machine guns, some of us swords. You got to have multi, skills together, right?
No, I'm not an advocate for using a sword in any kind of fight. It's a sport at this point. Don't ever think you can. People are like, oh, you must be good at fighting. I'm like, I'm good at observing and knowing I should run from every fight, and like that's what you should do. Get away from them unless you got a gun, which being in Arizona, a lot of us are armed. So, but oh, sorry, I got a message here real quick. Oh, everybody's doing good. Shall we wrap up? Yes. I think we're coming to the end of this live stream, but it has been really good. I have to say a special thank you to, I did not mention it before, but we have Andy Richter playing his part, selecting comments, did a great job keeping them coming up, and was a nominated volunteer. So thank you for doing that. Go ahead and pop yourself up in there. Do I have to do it? There you go. Thank you for controlling the universe of the podcast. And Dr. Perlmutter, it's always a pleasure. We always have such good conversations, and we sometimes struggle to stay on topic, but it's still engaging, I think. So I always have a good time, and I'd love to have you on here again. If folks want to get in touch with you, is there somewhere that I can direct them?
Yes, I only accept email and scrolls that are delivered by Magic Owl.
Should I put your email in the description, or would you
find it? They have to develop skills for the post-apocalypse and
Google him. You can Google him. That's one thing that we all know how to do. At least if you're here, you should know how to do that. So that is it, though. Thank you to everybody, and I guess that's it. Yes, cool. To yourself, folks.
Please like, subscribe, and comment, even if it's just with an emoji. It's a free way for you to support the channel, and for me, it might bring in some money from all the commercials they keep putting on my videos. Or if you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon or Ko-fi. I've got links in the description. Or you can hit the Money Heart Thanks button down below. Be better to yourself than this show was to you.